For those who are very interested in the ancient connection, we digress slightly and brought things up to the modern era, but perhaps it's also important to re-stress exactly how these oligarchs follow through in a bloodline manner. And one of the most important connections from the ancient world, the ancient dynasties, up into the modern, are a group of people from Italy, from Venice specifically, that have dominated the world for many generations, that have been loosely called the Black Venetians. Now this term, the Black Venetians or the Black Nobility, is their own term. This is not just a historical term used for them. This is one of their own terms. And they became known as the Black Nobility or the Black Venetians because literally their deeds were so black. Now the word Phoenician, who were the ancient descendants of the Atlantean race, an old ancient Semitic race. The Phoenicians were like the elites of the Semites. Okay, we have the Semitic race. The Semitic race is the largest racial group in the world. Well, we have many branches of the Semitic peoples. And the elites, you could say the royalty within the Semitic race, were what we know as the Phoenician race. These are the people who built the Temple of Solomon, who were the great navigators, the great mappers of the sky, and the great mathematicians and so on. Well, down into the modern world as we progress through the ages, the word Phoenician, as the Phoenicians settled in Italy, they became known as the Venetians, the Venetians. And they're worshippers of Venus. One of their gods or goddesses was literally Venetian. They're Venus worshippers. And that figures because if you're on the high seas, the stars and the moon and the luminaries are very important to you. And the Venetians, we have many families making up the Venetian oligarchy, but the Longhi and the Guelphs are of particular interest. Now, upon their move to Holland, the Black Venetians created the Great Amsterdam Bank, the financial hinge of the 17th century, and they also created the Dutch East India Company. They also controlled the finances of many royal dynasties, like the Stuarts. So they were lenders, financiers of some of the royal families. They were also the promoters of Martin Luther, of Protestantism, Puritanism, the Jesuits, the Club of Rome, the later Freemasons, and most other secret societies. Through the House of Hanover, that's the House of Orange, they came to England and have been the dominating power since William III. Christina Huth, in her book Venice, The Methodology of Evil, Part 3, she writes, Henry VIII had also thrown open the door for the cultural, political, and financial takeover of England by agents of the city-state of Venice. By the middle of the 1530s, Henry's government was in the hands of the Venetian agents and being shaped into a model of police-state political terror. By the end of Henry's reign, Venetian bankers were in control of a burgeoning English foreign debt and dictating terms to the English throne. Within slightly over a century following Henry's death, England had been transformed into the usurious, slave-trading imperial power of Great Britain under the dictatorship of the Venetian party, which had been transplanted directly from the lagoons of Venice. Now obviously in one program we can't go into this subsection, the whole story of the Venetian peoples. Just for now doing an overview to show you that here we have the connection between the Stuarts, the Tudors, and these Venetians. And the takeover was implemented by Thomas Cromwell. This was the agent who convinced Henry VIII to buy in and to accept the money of the incoming Venetians. So this connection is very, very vital and important to understand how the Phoenician, Sumerian, Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Nephilim concept, that bloodline, ties into the modern oligarchs. There's a thread. It can be traced like anything. The congressman and statesman Lyndon LaRouche, from an American context, is one of the greatest experts on this. But there's many other works talking about this connection. King William III of Hanover, the Prince of Orange. And we have George Ludwig I, also of the House of Hanover. These are the two kings, specifically, of the House of Orange, coming out of Italy by way of Holland. They appear in the history books as being Dutch kings, Dutch potentates, but their ancestry goes further back than that. Graham Lowry, in How the Venetian Virus Infected and Took Over England, writes, in December 1688, the armies of the Dutch Prince William of Orange invaded England, interrupting the Hobbesian nightmare the country had experienced under the deranged King Charles II and his brother James II. A worse nightmare was to follow when William seized the throne of James II, for he embodied a more highly distilled form of poison, which Venice had perfected during its sway over the remains of the Dutch Republic. This outright usurpation is blithely referred to in British Venetian parlance as the Glorious Revolution, which should give you some idea of how little regard for truth prevails in these circles. So here's a scholar who's in no doubt about the problem whatsoever. He's pointing out that the James II and Charles II debauchery is one thing, and then it's replaced by yet even more layers of the same thing. And as I said earlier, is it not from these times that all these idioms we just take for granted of the British Stock Exchange, the rising of the Navy, the great conflicts throughout the world, the whole concept of empire, the rising of the great universities, the rising of the merchant class? Who are the merchants named after Mercury? We have some questions here. The very things that we take for granted. The very idea that individuals on the street level say, oh, we can't imagine any secret society just coming in and taking over. Well, that's right. You needn't imagine that because it didn't happen. Secret societies obviously couldn't just come in to the wide diversity of our modern age and just take over. But they didn't do that. These oligarchs formed our cities. They formed the political systems that we have. No more than a few hundred years ago, it was crown or it was gown. It was cross or it was crown. It was monarch on one side to mind control you and brainwash you and throw you in a dungeon, or it was the popes and the potentates. Two forms of control. Nobody just came in and took over. These individuals have created our cities, created our industries. They were there from day one. They were billionaires from the 1st century AD. And they're dancing on their desks to find out how easy it is to manipulate the herd, of the population of the world. But they didn't just suddenly come in and take over like some normal mafioso group. These individuals created the entire structure of our life. Our forefathers, not so long ago, never even ventured more than 5-10 miles from their feudal villages. In fact, it was even a crime to even do so. So nothing could have been easier. You have military, monarchy, and you have the religious, the theocracy. Two forms that attain world domination more simply than we can ever even imagine. David Icke, in his book The Biggest Secret, says, William of Orange, that's William III, died in 1702. He and his wife Mary left no heirs, and so Mary's sister Anne became queen. Anne was the last of the Stuart monarchs. In 1714, the scene was set for the takeover of the British crown by the German black nobility family, the Hanovers. They were closely connected with the House of Hesse, which would become the launch pad for the House of Rothschild. The first Hanoverian king was George I. Queen Victoria, always famous for wearing black jewelry and wearing black clothes, was the Empress of India, the Empress of the world, the top of the Guelph dynasty. The family of Guelph, who was one of the major black nobility families. Today's modern Windsor family directly go back to the Guelph dynasty of the ancient world. The Guelph, Bourse-Lyon, Battenberg, Mountbatten, whatever you want to call it. These are all Hanoverian, Habsburgian families, all connected, all linked by blood. The British royal family, the Windsors, was a name adopted in the 1800s, and the reason was to give them an anglicized front, because in fact George I could hardly speak a word of English, and here they are declaring war on his brother, the Kaiser, in the First World War, and the so-called British royal family could hardly speak the English language. So in order to anglicize them and make them look more English, they adopted the name Windsor. But their original ancestral names is Saxe-Coburg-Battenberg, which they changed again to Mountbatten, Bourse-Lyon, which is the name of the Queen Mother, and Guelph. The word Guelph is the key word there because that's the Venetian connection, the Black Guelphs. Open any encyclopedia and start reading up on the black nobility and the Guelphs, and a fascinating story will unfold. Valdemar Valerian refers to them as the Serpentine world order, understanding that these people are from the Serpent dynasties. All subsequent coups d'etats and revolutions and wars of the 19th and 20th centuries are centered in the battle of the Guelphs to hold and enhance their power, now the new world order.